Jim Goodman, one of the owners and co-founders of Municipal Brew, and this is Masterclass Hamilton. So, one of the things that we talk about when we talk about beer is a long history of beer. Beer goes all the way back into ancient civilizations, but it's all about fermentation. And the thing about beer and any alcohol, fermentation is when the yeast eats sugar, lets off a byproduct of alcohol and carbon dioxide. Where you get the sugar determines what alcohol you're actually making. So for beer, you're actually using malted barley. But if you're doing blue agave cactus, you're making tequila. If you're using corn, you're making whiskey. If you're using potatoes and rye and things of that nature, you're making vodka. Basically any kind of fermentable sugar there. What I've got on the bar right now is some malted barley. And believe it or not, Butler County was number 2 in barley production in the state of Ohio prior to the Civil War all the way up through Prohibition. And the first bridge to cross the river, where the Columbia Bridge is right now, was actually paid for by Cincinnati Brewing Company, which was where the police station is right now in Hamilton. It was gave them the ability to not have to use a toll bridge and get access to the malted barley faster. There is still a malt house on C Street in Franklin in Hamilton called the Songen Malt House. It's now just a storage facility, but it's still standing. But that used to malt all the barley. So what you see is these kernels that you get from the barley, and what the maltster would do is they would get these seeds just about to the point of germination, and then they would cut it off. When they cut it off, the inside of this kernel is filled with sugar. So what we do is we crack these grains in order to get hot water into the kernel and extract the sugar from the malted barley. And that's called wort. The sugar water is called wort. So what we'll do is we'll then boil that wort, and then we'll add hops. These are actually hop pellets that we use. They're very, very pungent. Hops should be considered like a spice. So as a chef uses salt and pepper and coriander and cumin and nutmeg, brewers are going to use Citra hops, Cascade hops, Galaxy hops, Centennial hops. There's hundreds of different species of hops. They're grown all throughout the world. They impart the spice and the aromatic quality to the beer, and that's kind of how the hops go into the boil. Hops are also a natural preservative. So if you have ever heard, or if you're fans of IPAs, India Pale Ales, the reason why they call them India Pale Ale is because when India was a colony of Britain, and they would ship ale to India, they would have to go around the southern tip of Africa and the beer would spoil. If you overly hopped the beer, because there's antimicrobial properties to this and a preservative factor, by over-hopping the beer for its trip to India, it then preserved the beer. So therefore you had India Pale Ale. So after you have boiled the meat and potatoes of the meal, which is the meat, which is the malt, and the spice of the hops, you then bring it to a cooler temperature so you can pitch your yeast. And that's the 4 ingredients: the water, the malted barley, the hops, and the yeast. That makes up your beer. So once you have the beer, and now you have different types of beer. And I've got 4 beers here on the bar. One of them is our Approachable Blonde. This is a very light ale. When you're out and about looking for beers, look at the beer menu and see if they have the letters IBU after it. IBU stands for International Bittering Unit, and it tells you how bitter the beer is. The higher the number, the more bitter the beer is. The lower the number, the less bitter. It's not always equated to hops and how much hops are in it, but it is a fairly good indication as to how much hops are in the beer. The IBU of Approachable Blonde is 15, so it's a very low IBU beer. The IBU of our Stout is 60, and the IBU of our Anniversary Series Ale is 100, because we use a tremendous amount of hops in that beer. And it's a double IPA, or Imperial India Pale Ale, 2 I's, double I. When you see the word Imperial before a beer, that means it's got a higher alcohol content. So the alcohol has been jacked up a little bit from a traditional IPA to your double IPA. So those are things to look for on a menu. The other thing, of course, is your ABV, your alcohol by volume. What percent alcohol is in the beer? Our Approachable Blonde, This is a great beer to go with most dishes. It's very balanced. It's got a nice bready quality to it, biscuity quality to it, but it's very light, crisp, clean, clear. Very refreshing. We also use that as the base beer for our orange agave. So if you're looking for more of a fruit-forward beer, we actually take the approachable blonde and we add orange zest and blue agave nectar to it, and that's how we get our orange agave. This is a new one for us. This is a New England IPA. You can see how milky and cloudy it looks. That is a very popular style right now, the Nipa, the New England IPA. You may also refer to it or hear of it as a juicy IPA or even a hazy IPA. And the reason for that is because one of the components of the malt bill are flaked oats. And what the flaked oats does is it creates kind of a subtle blanket over the malted flavor. So it kind of lowers it, makes it more smooth, creamy beer, and it really allows the hops to pop in this beer. If you can kind of create more of a subtle note on the malt side, and you can really make the hops pop, that can still keep a somewhat balanced beer texture-wise, and it will still allow the hops to pop and do what it's supposed to do. The hops are a superstar of that. This beer is our off the trolley. It's an English mild. This is only about a 3.5% beer. English milds are usually very low in alcohol. They're very low in ABV, but you can see it's more of a tan color, a little darker color. And that's as a result of crystal malt. And we've got some crystal malt here on the bar. As we said, when that malted barley is about to germinate, the inside is filled with sugar. If the maltster then cooks it, what happens when you cook sugar? It caramelizes. So that's what happens with this type of malt. It starts to caramelize, and you get this darker color with more caramel flavors, more toffee notes. But for a very light beer, this is a very flavorful beer. For folks that are just starting off and getting into the craft beer community, I strongly suggest trying something like the Approachable Blonde or the Off the Trolley English Mild. These are very light beers on the palate, but they're very flavorful. And they're not just going to grab you by the throat with hops or big alcohol notes or things of that nature. The other beer we have here is our Midnight Cut Porter. Now porters have usually a chocolate malt or a black patent malt or a roasted malt. So if you think about it, when you really cook sugar and you burn sugar, it blackens. And that's basically what happens to that malt. That blackened malt, all the sugars have been cooked out of it. So how do you get the alcohol? You use at least 70% of that malt bill needs to be a lighter malt so you can actually have alcohol in the beer. Then you use your specialty grains, which are your darker malts, to go ahead and make the darker beer. But you're going to get big notes of coffee and chocolate, and it's just a very nice beer, especially in the wintertime. Some people like to drink it all year round. I'm a seasonal drinker myself. I like to drink the textures of the beer, the flavors of the beer. I have a tendency to go with the seasons. The darker, the bigger, the heavier beers, the higher alcohol by volume, I really like those in the winter. Whereas these lighter beers, these really kind of juicy IPAs, they go very well in the summer. And these are our beers. You can probably hear, you might be able to even hear some of the bubbling going on behind us. That is active fermentation going on right now. So there is yeast in here going to town. It's going to town on our Stout IPA right now, which is a West Coast IPA. As that yeast is fermenting the wort, that sugar water in there, it's turning it into alcohol. It's letting off the CO2. The CO2 comes down the tube and into that bucket there, and it makes the sanitized water bubble. It kind of sounds like a hot tub. So I don't have a hot tub here, if you can actually hear that on the audio. And that's kind of how we're going. Now, if you want, I will show you how to pour the proper beer. Okay, so now we talk about how to properly pour a beer. And a lot of people think that this is, I can pour a beer, but there's a proper way to do it and an improper way to do it. Having beer in a glass intensifies the experience. When you drink beer straight from a can, you lose most aromatic qualities that might be in the beer. So to have the real proper experience, even if you're drinking a Bud or Bud Light, is to pour it into a glass. You want to make sure the glass is clean, obviously, but you also want to make sure that there's no residual soaps in the glass. So we use a glass rinser, it's right over here, but we rinse the inside of the glass out. It helps chill the glass a little bit, but primarily it's getting a lot of the sanitizer that we use and any soap residue out of the glass. The other aspect of this is understanding what we're looking at here. We've got our tap handle, but this portion is called the faucet. And the faucet, of course, is where the beer actually comes out and is dispensed. These have flow controls on them. Some do, some don't. It's completely up to the proprietor as to whether they want to include flow controls. But what we want to do, we never want to submerge the beer into the faucet. We never want to have that below the beer line, because what it does is it contaminates the faucet, and you can get flies and fruit flies and just gunk on this outside portion of the faucet. So never do that. Anybody that does that, send the beer back, tell them to redo it and do it right. When we pour the beer, what we want to do also is we want to make sure that the tap is open full. We don't want to open it slightly, because what's happening is you've got carbonated beer behind there, and the resistance you're going to get from a half-open tap is going to start to release that carbonation prematurely, and you're going to primarily get a foam bomb in your beer. You don't want that. So what you want to do is you want to hold that tap wide open. You want to hold the glass at about a 45-degree angle, not touching the faucet. Once the beer starts to get up closer to the top, you then level it out, and you should end up having about 3/4 of an inch to an inch head on the beer. So here we are, 45-degree angle, and as we bring it closer to the top, get there, boom. That is a properly poured beer. The other aspect that you can do with beer is nitro beers. Nitro beers are beers that are pushed with nitrogen instead of carbon dioxide. The biggest, most popular beer of that is your Guinness Dry Irish Stout. This is our Laoc Dry Irish Stout. You can see the faucet looks a little bit different. This is actually called a sparkler, and because this is coming out with nitrogen, sparkler actually pushes that beer through, and you're going to get a nice meringue head. Now this is different. Holding it straight up, I'm going to fill it about 2/3 of the way full, and then I'm going to let it sit. A properly poured nitro beer should take quite a few minutes to pour. And as you can see, you're going to see the nitro falling out of it. You're going to get this nice cascade effect of the nitro coming out, and you're going to get this nice meringue type head up top. So we're going to let that sit for a few minutes, and then after it sits, you fill it up to the top and give it to the customer to enjoy. And that's how you properly pour beers.